Hey you guys, and welcome back to another one of my videos. If you're new here, my name is Holly and thank you so much for watching. Before I get into this case, I wanted to quickly give my friend's little business a shout out. The Aurora Collective is where I got my earrings from. She has so much cute stuff in there, so just go check her out if you want to support a small Australian business. I also wanted to quickly give you guys a child abuse warning. This is a pretty brutal case with a lot of child abuse throughout, and I do discuss specifics as well. So if this case isn't for you, I have a lot of other cases on my channel that don't cover these sort of topics, and you're welcome to give those ones a watch if you want to. But without further ado, let's get into it. So this case involves the tragic death of 6-year-old Kaisha Weippeart. But before I get into that, I want to give you guys a bit of background on her mum, Christy. So when Christy was a child, she didn't have the best life. Sadly, her father was really abusive towards her mother, and Christy would see this as she was growing up, which meant for very understandable reasons, she really did not like her father that much at all. His actions towards her mother were absolutely horrible. One time he kicked her in the head with steel-capped boots. Another time he tried to strangle Christy's mother out the front of their Queensland house. Christy also saw him kick and punch her multiple times throughout the first 10 years of her life. And sadly, Christy's father would hit her also. When she was only 10 years old, her mum actually passed away from an epileptic fit. And Christy had known that her mum had epilepsy because she was actually the main person who cared for her mum, which is so sad within itself, a 10-year-old having to be the main carer of a sick parent. But she did it because her father didn't. In fact, when her mother died, which was probably in the early 90s, her father actually left. He left her and her younger siblings all on their own, and it meant that they had to go into group homes. When she was 16, she left the group home and moved into a woman's refuge. And then at 18, she was given a unit to live in by the government, which was located in Trachea, which is in Sydney's eastern suburbs. Around the same time, Christy actually met a man by the name of Chris Weippeart. He was a few years older than Christy, but he lived in the same sort of area, and they'd actually met through Chris's younger brother, but I suppose they must have all just sort of become good friends, as you do with your siblings' friends when you get older. Christy would spend a lot of time at Chris and his brother's house, where they lived with two other siblings and their mum, Liz. And Liz wasn't the biggest fan of Christy. She actually thought that she was quite lazy because she made no attempts to get a job. And something that could have potentially affected her ability to get a job was the fact that Christy had quite a low IQ. Her IQ was actually 68, and I believe the normal range is between about 85 and 115. And this is important because I think it also helps us to understand a little bit as to why in the future she thought the actions that she took were acceptable. And I'm not justifying what she did, but I think that it does help give us an understanding to her pattern of reasoning. Now, I don't know if Christy and Chris were in a relationship, but what I do know is not too long after they met, they started doing the deed together. And as we all know, sometimes if you're not careful when you're putting the P in the V, you can get pregnant. I'm gonna stop here and say if you didn't know how that worked, you were probably too young to be watching these sort of videos, and I'm so sorry I was the one to give you your sex ed just then. And it might be a good idea to click off now. But for the rest of you, yes, Christy found out that she was pregnant and Chris was the dad, and understandably Chris kind of freaked out when he got this news. Apparently he hopped on his bike and rode around just panicking. And look, I would probably do the same. Having a child is no small change to a life, so I can understand why he did that. And the pregnancy wasn't a smooth one either. The couple had decided together to keep the baby, but one time when Christy was really upset at the Weippeart's household, she was actually seen punching her pregnant stomach. And thankfully the baby survived this, but this is very worrying behavior. And on top of this, she also drank drank and smoked throughout the whole pregnancy, which I'm sure was not good for the little baby. But regardless of this, on February the 6th, 2003, the couple welcomed a little baby boy who they called Aiden. While in hospital and giving birth, it was reported that Christy was very aggressive towards the nurses there, which actually meant that the nurses reported her to the Department of Community Services. This department, which actually doesn't have that name anymore, it's now called FACS, which stands for Family and Community Services. Basically, their job is to make sure that families and children are provided with practical and emotional support that they need. So these FACS workers made a visit to the household of Christy and Chris a few days after Aiden was born to check up on him. And at this point, they actually lived with Liz again. So even though Christy had her own place, they decided to live with Liz, and there was a whole bunch of reasons for this, mainly just because then Liz could help look after this baby and Christy could sleep through the night. But anyways, I digress. When FACS went to check on Aiden, they found that he was mostly healthy, but he was just being slightly underfed. This couple wasn't the best match though, and they fought constantly. Police went to their house at least once and FACS were again contacted. There was just constant conflict between the two. One night, Christy and Chris decided to take Aiden to Christy's flat, and there had only been one other time that they stayed at this flat. I couldn't work out why they decided to stay at Christy's flat this night, but they did. They put Aiden down that night like any other night, and then at 2:30, Chris got up to feed and change the baby before putting him back to sleep. And he was meant to do the same at 6 a.m, but the couple slept through this time and they only ended up waking up around midday the next day. When he eventually got up and went to Aiden's room, he actually saw a sight that no parent would ever wish to see. Baby Aiden was blue and not breathing. Both Chris and Christy were distraught. Chris rode over to his mum's house and told her what had happened, and Christy just stayed at the house wailing and crying. In any usual situation, Aiden's death would have been ruled as SIDS, but it's really hard to determine if a young baby has died from suffocation naturally or on purpose, because they're too little to be able to fight back, if anything was to happen on purpose. And because FACS had already been involved, showing that the couple were facing parenting struggles, it was decided that Aiden's death was seen as suspicious. Neither parent nor anyone else was ever charged with anything in relation to this though, and so I'm not going to sit here and say that they did something when there's no proof that they did at all. And I can imagine Aiden's death would have affected the couple deeply. A few months later, Christy would get pregnant again, and in April of 2004, Christy and Chris would welcome a baby girl who they named Kaisha. When Kaisha was born, Chris and Christy officially moved into a place of their own, a little government flat in the suburbs of Bidwell. There's not too much information on Kaisha in the first 15 months of her life, but in the reports I did read, it seems like she was a happy little baby. Sadly though, by the time Kaisha was 15 months old, this would change. Around this time, one night, Christy and Chris had a huge fight. These fights weren't uncommon, but this one was particularly bad. Christy, in a fit of rage, picked her daughter up by her neck and bit her on the arm when the little girl tried to crawl away. Baby Kaisha was inconsolable, as you can imagine if you've just been bitten by your mom. And Chris actually contacted the police about this incident, and because of this, Kaisha then went to hospital. The couple split up because of this fight, and Kaisha went back to living at Liz's house with Chris. And Chris, although trying to be the best father for his daughter, he was struggling with health issues of his own. He had diabetes that he had to take insulin for daily, and it meant at times if his sugar levels weren't right, he could get slurred speech, become woozy, and lose the ability to walk and move properly. I think he really struggled with his diabetes. The technology that was available back in the early 2000s to check your blood sugar levels is nowhere near as good as it is today. And also it seems like he didn't live the healthiest lifestyle either. He did use drugs, as did Christy, and although they would try and stay clean for their daughter, addiction is a hard thing to fight. While Kaisha was in Chris's care, Fax actually came to visit, and on this visit he ended up signing some paperwork which stated that he wasn't fit to take care of his daughter. I don't know the reasoning as to why, but this meant that Kaisha was actually taken off him and put into foster care. Christy, because of the fact that she bit her daughter, she'd been convicted of assault occasioning in actual bodily harm and was placed on a good behaviour bond. She was then made to go to anger management classes, which she did while Kaisha was in foster care, and because of this, she was allowed supervised visits. She took these visits very seriously, as it seemed like she really wanted to get Kaisha back, but she did have setbacks also. Christy got done on various traffic offences during this time, but in the end she did get Kaisha back. And it wasn't long before Kaisha was in foster care again. This time it was for about a year, but Christy wasn't one to give up easily, and she fought to get Kaisha back for a second time, and she succeeded. By this point, Christy and Chris were done. They'd gone their separate ways and they didn't really have contact with each other at all. Christy was not giving up on love though, and soon enough she started a relationship with a new man called Robert Smith. When Kaisha was 3.5, Christy and Robert would welcome their first daughter together, and they would go on to have a little boy 2 years after that. But while giving birth to Kaisha's younger sister, a nurse at the hospital actually noticed that little 3.5-year-old Kaisha had a big bruise on her face. She was really concerned by this and actually reported it to Fax, which meant that again, when Christy was out of hospital, Fax made another visit to their house to see what was going on. Now, this visit that the Department of Family and Community Services took really leaves a lot of questions unanswered. While there, they reported seeing that bruise on Kaisha's head as well as a cigarette burn on her. When asked about the bruise, the little girl couldn't recall where it came from, but when asked about the burn, Kaisha said, "Mum did that, Mum hit there." I don't know why Kaisha wasn't taken out of the home at this point, and I'm very aware that there is definitely information on this visit that I don't know, and so I can't make a full judgment, but it just seems so sad to me. It's like, what abuse does a child have to go through for it to be enough for them to be taken out of a home? That's the part that I don't really understand. Like, how far does it have to go? It just seems like this point is a significant point in her life where everyone failed her. Fast forward a few years later though to July of 2010, and Kaisha was now 6 years old. And this was meant to be her first year of school too, so by July in Australia she should have done about 2 terms, but Kaisha had only attended 4 days of school in her life. I'm guessing the reason that she only went that many times is because on the 4th time that she attended, her school teacher actually noticed a bruise on her head again, and this teacher reported it to the Department of Education. So more people went to Kaisha's home to see what was going on. Even though fax workers went to visit Kaisha's family home multiple times, they said they had no success because no one would ever answer the door. On Saturday, July 31st, 2010, Christy, Robert, Kaisha's younger toddler sister, and her newborn baby brother were all at the family home. That night together they all watched The Golden Compass, and Kaisha was put to bed around 9:30 that night. The next morning when Christy and Robert awoke, they were shocked to find that Kaisha was not in her bed or anywhere in the house. When searching around the house, they noticed that the front door was slightly open, and there were no signs of forced entry, but a slightly open door is definitely very worrying when you have a missing child, and so they called the police straight away. On the call to police, Christy was a mess. She was wailing and crying, and they tried to console her on the phone, but she was too upset. She really seemed to be acting like any other mother would if they just found out that their child was missing, but this will become important later on. One friend who supported Christy throughout this time was a lady called Amber. She'd been friends with Christy since Kaisha had first been put in foster care, and she was one of the main people that played a really big role in supporting Christy in trying to get Kaisha back each time. So Amber came over straight away when Christy gave her a call, and she noted that Robert wasn't there. He was actually up at the local Westfield looking for Kaisha, and Christy wasn't there either, but it was because she was next door at Robert's mum's house. And Christy was distraught. She was panicked and upset, and Amber tried to console her while they waited for police to arrive. One of the first things the police did during their investigation was go to Kaisha's father's house, Chris's house. He still lived with his mum Liz at the same place, and when police checked there was no sign of Kaisha. In fact, Chris and his mum Liz didn't even know that Kaisha was back in Christy's care at this point. And Chris was actually in hospital at the specific time that Kaisha went missing. He was in there because he was getting his toe amputated due to diabetes related complications. And although Chris had not seen Kaisha in a while, he was so concerned to hear that she was missing, and him and his mum joined the search straight away, doing anything that they could to try and find their granddaughter and daughter. Only a few days after Chris found out that his daughter was missing, he actually ended up going into hospital again. He was vomiting up blood, and it was said that it was due in part to the stress that he was going through at this time. But with no clues as to where Kaisha had gone, the general belief in the Mount Druitt area was that there was an unidentified child abductor in the area. There were huge searches taking place in the area. Police were looking into neighbors' houses, yards, drains, bins, and also the local bushland. Because of the area where they are, there is a lot of bushland around where they live. Police also started interviewing friends, family, and neighbors of Christy and Robert. And from all of these interviews, police noted something very interesting. No one besides Kaisha's mum and stepfather had actually seen her for the last 3 weeks before she was reported missing. And in the next few days, this case was actually transferred to the homicide squad. And I'm gonna read you guys a definition of the sort of cases that a homicide squad would cover. So the homicide squad is a mobile unit operated in any part of the state of New South Wales. They investigate homicides and deaths of an unusual or suspicious nature, the discovery of human skeletal remains, and the disappearance of persons under unusual or suspicious circumstances. The public didn't know it at the time, but this squad was very interested in looking into Christy and Robert a little bit more. Their stories just didn't fully add up, and Christy didn't really seem to be acting like a normal grieving parent would. Christy really didn't want to do any interviews with the media, and there is no right or wrong way to go about being a grieving parent, but it just seemed a little strange because police wanted her to do these interviews. She was the one that was saying no. And on top of this, the media would be camped outside her and Robert's house, and Robert would allegedly go out there and throw eggs at the media's cars. And again, allegedly, Christy could be heard inside just laughing at this whole ordeal. And again, it just doesn't seem like how you would be acting if your daughter is missing. And again, even the fact that they were at home, they weren't out searching for their missing daughter. They were leaving it up to police. Like what? Like, wouldn't you be out there doing absolutely everything and anything you could to find your missing daughter? Because of this behavior, people started questioning Christy and her story. All of this nonchalant behavior was starting to worry the people around her. Her friend Amber at this time started to really question the likeliness of Christy being involved. And I'm guessing that Christy started to pick up that people were becoming suspicious of her because she finally faced the media. In early April, Christy pled for her daughter to come home, and I want to play a short clip of this so you guys can see the way she was acting on camera.
With no trace of the little girl, her distraught mother made a dramatic appeal to the public for help.
Do you understand her? Can they please contact the police?
At her side, the 6-year-old's stepfather.
You can't describe how it's been. You don't know until you put yourself in my shoes.
Kaisha Abrahams was reported missing by her mother on Sunday morning. She told detectives she last saw her daughter on Saturday night when she tucked her into bed.
She was beautiful.
Forensic investigators are sifting through the family unit and garage. Dozens of volunteers and police are preparing for another night of door-knocking as the search for Kaisha Abrahams is stepped up. John Thompson, ABC News, Mount Druitt.
A lot of people really felt bad for Christy and Robert after this video came out, and why wouldn't you? She'd already lost a son and now her daughter was missing too. And she also had 2 young children still in her care. And so I can't imagine how hard it would have been to juggle looking after a 2-year-old and a newborn baby while worrying about Kaisha. During the months before Kaisha went missing, Christy had actually gotten back in contact with her dad, and she saw him often. It came out that right when her baby boy was born, Christy actually asked her father to take Kaisha to look after her, but she didn't ask him like that. This is allegedly what she said. She shits and pisses the bed and plays up at school. I'm sick of her. I will hurt her. I will kill her. Who says that about their daughter? When the results of the forensic investigation of the couple's house came back, it supported the theory that Christy and Robert knew more than what they were letting on to, as there was remnants of Kaisha's blood all over her bedroom. And there's actually clips of when Christy was asked about this blood all over Kaisha's room while she was in an interview, and it's so interesting hearing the tone of her voice change. I'm gonna include the clip here so you guys can see what I'm talking about.
Was she in her pyjamas at the time, or was she about to get into the bath, or you don't know?
No, it's in the morning.
In the morning.
So had she changed from her pyjamas, or was she still in her pyjamas at that stage?
What?
When she cut her head?
No, she would have been getting dried.
Oh,
So she would have had nothing
shower.
on.
Okay, so she's having showers. So the kids have showers in the morning, do they? The children will
Morning
bath?
and night, whenever.
Okay. Would there be any reason why there'd be more blood, not just in her unit, but throughout the unit?
What are you trying to say?
I'm just saying that when we forensically examined the unit, there's an amount of Kaisha's blood throughout the unit, and I'm just trying to ask you how that would have got there.
I don't know.
No. Okay.
Are we talking about the park around in Woodstock?
Yes, right next door.
Right next door.
Yes.
Okay, so for Robert to end up in Westville at Mount Druitt, is that unusual?
What do you mean?
Well, Robert's, when he's left your unit, he's gone into Westville, all the way to Westfield, and looked inside Westfield.
Like he's looked all the way where we walked down to the Westfields.
Yeah, but you don't take her to the shops.
I do. Like.
Now, look, I've been through a whole week of her life, and she hasn't left the unit.
So what are you trying to say?
No, what I'm trying to say is, why did he end up down in Mount Druitt Shopping Centre?
But he looked all around, and to go to Mount Druitt.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that you don't take her shopping. Why would she go there? She'd never been there, has she?
She has. Maybe not the week that you're talking about. Oh, you know what? This is over, seriously, because what are you trying to get at?
All right, I'll move on. All I'm saying is, that Robert, why did he go to Westfield? That's all I'm asking. It's a simple
question. To have a look. You would have seen, you would have got the CT.
But that's it's a long way from where you are, that's all.
Things just were not adding up, and sadly, even though police were pretty certain they had their murderer, they couldn't press any charges because they just didn't have enough evidence. A lot of the time, if nobody is found, it can really affect the murderer being charged because there's no real way of proving what has been done to the person who's missing. Even if it seems like there is no other theory as to who could have done something to someone, there's just no way to prove in court that a specific person did something to, in this case, Kaisha. And so a body really needed to be found. But days turned into weeks, and then weeks turned into months, and still Kaisha was missing. Undercover police were watching Christy and Robert very closely though, and in April of 2011, Christy actually admitted to an undercover policeman that she was there when Kaisha Weippeart died. She didn't confess to killing her though, so she wasn't completely honest, but let's talk about it. I couldn't find any information on who Christy thought this undercover policeman was. I don't know if they'd formed a friendship or she bought drugs from him. I have no idea. And the video is really bad quality also. I will link it below so you guys can watch it if you want to. But basically, she can be seen sitting on a couch in a house somewhere, and we can hear the conversation taking place. She described how one night her daughter had hit her head really badly on the side of her bed. Christy said she picked Kaisha up and she just felt like jelly. She said that she was awake, but not awake, not responding. She said she told Kaisha to squeeze her finger, which Kaisha didn't do, and then Christy put her in her bedroom so that she could keep an eye on her overnight. Christy said she fell asleep though, and when she woke up in the morning, Kaisha wasn't breathing. Because of this, she then went down to the garage with Robert where they got a suitcase and they put Kaisha's body in there. She said her and Robert then caught a taxi to some nearby bushland where they buried the tiny little body of Kaisha Weippeart. On what would have been Kaisha's 7th birthday in 2011, both Robert and Christy were arrested and charged with the murder of Kaisha Weippeart. They had actually gone to where Kaisha was buried that night and police had followed. And after the couple had left, the police dug up the ground there and sadly found human remains. These were later confirmed to be those of Kaisha, which had been buried in bushland in Shelvley, which is a suburb close by to Mount Druitt. Because there was now a body, a post-mortem examination could take place. The results of this were so sad. They really highlighted the fact that Kaisha had suffered severe abuse throughout the entire 6 years of her life. It showed previous wounds to her nose, 2 breaks in her jaw, and wounds to her skull. It showed consistent twisting of her arm bones, fractured teeth, and 10 separate severe blunt force injuries to her head, jaw, and body. I just don't know if I will ever understand abusers. I just don't know how you could ever do any of that to a child. Or anybody. A trial for Christy and Robert were held separately, and in these trials we would come to learn what really happened to Kaisha the night that she died and the following days. It was concluded that Kaisha had either been thrown against a wall or the corner of her bed, hitting her head so severely that it caused her to die a slow and painful death. The next morning she was put in a suitcase and left in her room for just under a week. By this point, her body would have started decomposing and it would have started to really smell, which is when she was moved to the grave in Shelvley. When she was there, her body was then set alight by Robert in an attempt to try and conceal the wounds that her body had sustained. The trial also highlighted the fact that the couple had cleaned the entire apartment and thrown away all the clothes and shoes that they had worn that night. They had also thrown away SIM cards that they'd used after that time. Presumably on those SIM cards there'd been texts and whatnot about what they were doing with Kaisha. Robert was convicted of manslaughter and given a 16-year sentence, which he has to serve a minimum of 12 years, meaning he can actually apply for parole next year in 2023. Christy pleaded guilty to murdering Kaisha, but what was interesting is in this trial, the judge said that they couldn't prove that Christy alone was the one that abused Kaisha, and also on the night Kaisha died, they couldn't prove that she'd received more than 2 hits to her head. And that mattered a lot because it meant that there was no real way to prove that Christy had intended to murder Kaisha. There was only proof that she had intended to cause grievous bodily harm, which in turn meant that she was only sentenced to a non-parole period of 16 years. So she will be eligible for parole in April of 2027. As for Kaisha's biological father, Chris, he actually passed away before the trials of Robert and Christy even took place. He passed away in his sleep, and his death certificate said that he passed away from natural causes. And he was only in his late 20s, but he did have other health issues that I mentioned before. I really do feel so sad for him and his family though. Imagine going through the loss of 2 children, Aiden and then Kaisha. It would just be so heartbreaking. As for Kaisha's youngest siblings, her sister would now be about 14 and her brother would be about 12. And I'm not sure where they are, but I truly hope that wherever they are, they've been taken care by just loving parents. I personally feel like Christy's sentence was nowhere near enough. I feel like our court systems to this day do not protect children adequately, and I do understand why she got that small sentence because it was a manslaughter sentence and not a murder sentence, but I just don't get how, with all of her previous history of abuse towards children, it's still considered manslaughter. But I'm gonna leave it up to you guys in the comments below to let me know what your opinions are on this case and on the sentencing. Please give this video a like if you enjoyed it. It helps out my channel so much. And also subscribe if you want to see more videos from me. As always, I will also link my Instagram below. If you want to see more of me, you're welcome to follow me on there. And thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys are having a wonderful day wherever you are, and hopefully I will see you in my next video. Bye you guys.